Hello everyone, and you're very welcome to our webinar today on environmental policy making, the circular economy, and the roles of the EU, Ireland and civil society. I'm Catherine Ford and I'm convener of the Research for Civil Society, Environment and Social Action Cluster of ISS 21, the Institute for Social Science in the 21st Century at UCC. The research cluster is co-hosting today's webinar with the UCC Civic and Community Engagement Committee and Unique City Lab. I'll just briefly refer to City Lab, Unique City Lab. It's a living lab project delivered as part of UCC's membership of the Unique European University, which is a European university involving 10 cities and universities across Europe in actions towards more inclusive and sustainable futures. We hope that today's event will illuminate the importance of the circular economy and its role in facilitating sustainable production and consumption across a wide range of areas. We're going to look at how policy making on the circular economy happens at EU level and the importance of civil society input into policy making on the circular economy. I think this event is timely because, as many of you may be aware, Ireland remains below the EU average for achieving a circular economy at the moment. But also this year, Ireland produced its first whole of government strategy on the circular economy, and legislation on the circular economy is being planned here. I'm just going to say a few words about the schedule for the seminar this morning and a little bit of housekeeping as well. Our first speaker will be our keynote, Cillian Lohan, and Cillian's paper will be followed by a response from Dr. Barbara Doyle-Prestwich from UCC. We'll then have some questions for Cillian and Barbara, and the chance then for a discussion and comment from our audience. If you have a question or comment, please place it in the Q&A box on your Zoom interface. And also, could everyone please ensure that their mics and cameras are off apart from the speakers, just to ensure good connectivity and so on. So I'd like to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker, Cillian Lohan. Cillian is the CEO of the environmental NGO Green Economy Foundation, which is an Irish NGO based here in Cork. Cillian is also a vice president of the European Economic and Social Committee and a founding member of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. Cillian is going to talk to us about the history and evolution of the circular economy policies that have been developed by the EU, and also about the establishment and implementation of the Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform at EU level, and explore how structures such as this and the European Economic and Social Committee are designed to ensure bottom-up engagement and feedback, and how that may result in policy change. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome Cillian.
Thank you, Catherine. Much appreciated. I'm delighted to join you today and be here and part of this very interesting webinar. Let me start by saying that I think it's probably worth describing what we mean by circular economy very briefly. I know we could spend the whole webinar discussing what the circular economy is and the nuances of it and so on. But for those who are still new to the subject, it's worth realizing that it's an idea that's been around since the 1970s with Professor Walter Stahel, who was first writing about the idea of a circular economy or a regenerative economy. And in the early days, the economy as it functions at the moment, whatever the other policies that are going on around that, whatever economic policies are going around that, there was a very distinct feature of our economic model, which was that it was based on extracting things from nature, extracting raw materials, processing them, making stuff, making things out of them, making products, selling those products and consuming those products, and then throwing away the waste afterwards, either the product when the use was finished, or the byproducts of using something specifically. So there was a lot of waste basically involved in it, and a lot of consumerism involved in it. And he first described that as linear, as kind of like a straight line where you're taking something from nature and it's ending up in landfill at the end of it. And the idea of circularity is basically to take all the materials from the natural world that are in circulation. If you look around you, all the materials that comprise the products and the structures that we see, um, and to continue using them, so that rather than extracting virgin raw materials from nature to make things, that you're actually reusing the materials that are already in circulation. And that was the basic concept. There are kind of two big circles, the one I've just described, and the other one is a that's kind of the materials circle, and then there's a biological circle as well, where you have biodegradable goods, where you have, for example, in agriculture and forestry, where you have materials that are going back into nature. Anyhow, and you have a biological circle there, where things are being regenerated through breaking back down in a different format, and then, for example, a tree, and then regrowing again. So it's an interesting concept. There's a lot of writing out there. There's a lot of talks on it out there, but I thought it's worth recapping what we're talking about. Secondly, to also describe the EESC that you mentioned, I'm a part of, because it's important to understand that in terms of consultation and stakeholder engagement and bottom-up policy making. Because when the EU was established, one of the founding treaties, when we refer to the treaties that govern the EU, was the Treaty of Rome in 1957. And there they set up, of course, the European Commission, which most of us are familiar with, the big institution that initiates legislation, with commissioners coming from each member state. Mairead McGuinness being the commissioner from Ireland at the moment. And then you have the second big institution, which is the European Parliament. There we elect the MEPs, and they discuss the legislation that's proposed by the Commission, and they formulate it and make amendments to it. And then the third big head of the monster is the council, which is all the heads of state, where they meet as the European Council. And those three big institutions are the legislators for the EU, for EU legislation and policy. In the middle of those, the Treaty of Rome established the European Economic and Social Committee, and that is an advisory body to the other institutions. So we have 359 members. We're appointed through government from each member state. So Ireland, for example, has 9 members appointed. I'm one of the 9, and we're appointed from all over Europe from different sectors. So we're not politicians, we're not civil servants, we're people who are working in the field in civil society. So there's people from the employers groups and from the business sector. There are people from trade unions or the workers groups, and there are people from what we would think of as traditional civil society organizations, like me from an environmental NGO. We have people from the farming groups. We have people from consumer groups, from disability organizations, youth organizations, and so on. Within that structure, then we give our input into policy making. So it's a really good structure, not that it works perfectly all of the time, not that it doesn't have its problems, but as a structural engagement of civil society, it works reasonably well, or at least it exists and can continue to be improved. Within that, I would say, to be very clear, that there are 4 members of the 359 who come from the environmental sector. So we are very much a minority within this group. So the fact that we get anything passed that's in relation to climate and environment and biodiversity requires a lot of work in building support from different sectors of society, and forces us, importantly, or forces me in my work, to always look at the social aspect, always look at the stakeholder engagement aspect, so you can find commonalities with other stakeholders and other actors like trade unions or employers, and bring them along on the journey. And specifically with the European circular economy, in 2015, the Commission published a European circular economy um, action plan. And this action plan was a range of specific pieces of legislation that was designed to make Europe go circular with its economy. Uh, it was the first stage. I would say that it was very much characterized by being focused on recycling. The first thinking when people are introduced to the idea of circular economy is they think this means we should be recycling more, and the recycling industry was really excited in 2015 and 2016, thinking, wow, means that everything's going to be about recycling. Recycling is very much the low hanging fruit, or the first stage of a circular economy. And when you get to full circularity, you should really have very little recycling. You should be much higher up the chain on that. You should be reusing and repairing um, um, goods, and using more services rather than recycling. But the initial stages of circular economy, I would say 2015 to 2018, was very much focused on recycling, and that was important. It was important to get those numbers up, and to improve that side of things. There was a lot of legislation on separate collection, so that householders could have the opportunity to divide their waste out and have it collected separately, which made it easier for recycling. But there were a number of flaws in the implementation of this. In particular, to give you a very practical example, for recycling targets, which were set up to about 60 or 70%, and we argued for a long time in Parliament that the target should be 65% or 70%. Eventually, we got a very good target, but where it was being measured was at the point of collection, essentially. So if let's say you put all your stuff into your recycling bin, it gets collected by a truck, it gets taken to the recycling center. It was at that point at the recycling center that the percentage of waste was measured, and that's what was reported back as being recycled. In reality, what was happening next was that the recycling at the sorting center was divided out, and over 50% of it in many cases was not suitable for recycling, or was contaminated because there was inappropriate materials put in with the paper, for example, or in with the plastics. um, and so a lot of it was going to landfill anyway, or was being shipped out of the country, and going to landfill outside of the EU. But so we identified that as a significant problem, and that changed towards the end of 2018, where the measuring of recycling rates was moved to post sorting, which meant that it was a much more accurate figure. So building on from that, a second circular economy action plan was developed as part of the Green New Deal in 2021. And this was a huge step forward, I would say, in circular economy at an EU level and in terms of the policy. And this time, although there was a whole range of legislation underneath the action plan, I would say, like, the first action plan was characterized by recycling. The second action plan was characterized by eco design. So it's very much a focus on what we call eco design, and that puts an obligation on producers and manufacturers to design products in a way that means they can be repaired, and that the repair shouldn't cost more than replacement. The example of a washing machine is often given in this case, where if a little part breaks on the washing machine, it's sometimes cheaper to go out and buy a new one rather than replace the little part that is broken. Being negotiated at the moment within those three institutions is the right to repair for consumers. If you buy something, you should be able to repair it. Also, there's been work done on planned obsolescence, this idea that manufacturers make things, let's say a washing machine, again, not to pick on the washing machine industry, and they make it and it's designed to break three 3 weeks or 3 months after the warranty runs out. I think we've all experienced that. Officially, it doesn't happen. It's just a coincidence that these things break when your warranty ends. But I think in practice, we all know that it exists. So the second action plan, the current action plan, is very much focused on those issues and getting the design right. And when we have the design of products right, it means our ability to retrieve the raw materials that are caught up in the products is greatly enhanced. And this leads to an opportunity for remanufacturing, an opportunity to create a vibrant secondary raw materials market. So to go back to my first description of the circular economy, a market that is not about taking raw materials from nature, but taking raw materials from the goods that are already in circulation. And eco design helps that because it means they're designed in a way in the first place that you can retrieve the materials from them. Again, to give you a practical example, I spoke to some car manufacturers who described the fact that 80% of the inside of their cars were made of plastic, but there were so many different polymers in the plastic, let's say in the dashboard, that for them to retrieve the plastic from that and be able to reuse it meant huge energy inputs to break down the dashboard into individual polymers of plastic, because there was 27 or 28 different polymers in the dashboard. And so it wasn't feasible for them to do that. It wasn't either in terms of sustainability, it wasn't feasible for them to do that because of the energy inputs coming from fossil fuels that needed to go in to break them down. And economically, they weren't incentivized to do that. So eco design is about repairing or designing things in the first place, where you're keeping in mind that when you need to remanufacture or retrieve raw materials from these things, it's actually feasible to do it because it's been designed with that in mind in the first place. We see some of that also in the construction sector, and there's some specific policies around that, where buildings are designed so that when they're being demolished or taken down, you can easily retrieve the bits that can be reused again, rather than everything being mixed in together. So happy to discuss more about that in questions later if needs be. And so as part of our response to that first action plan, again, going back to 2016, I wrote the report from the EESC, and in it, I proposed to establish a European circular economy stakeholder platform, an indication that I've been operating within the institutions for too long is the fact that that's what we called it, I think, because that's about as catchy as the EU gets, European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. And what the way it's designed is to put stakeholders at the heart of decision making and to create a feedback mechanism so that stakeholders could actually talk to the people who are writing the policies. So we're very privileged within the EESC, and I'm very privileged in my role there that I can speak directly to the person who's sitting at the laptop typing up the wording for the legislation that's being proposed. And we also then have access to all of these stakeholders. So by setting up the platform, we invited stakeholders from all over Europe, businesses, academia, local governments, civil society organizations, to apply to be part of this platform. And they all join, and then they have an opportunity to feedback in a coordinated way to the European Commission or the European Parliament, but in particular the European Commission, who are initiating the legislation, and say to them, this is working for us, this is not working for us. In order for us to be able to transition to circularity, these are the things that we need to change. And so to give that direct feedback from on the ground people working in real life, who are disconnected normally from all the lobbying and the decision making at a policy level, and to give them a chance throughout the year to be able to give that feedback. We also, through the website, the Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform website, created a knowledge sharing hub. So it's a space for peer-to-peer sharing. So people who are starting off on this circular journey are understanding it more and are able to share their knowledge and their experience with each other. And we have a space there where we put on all of the strategies that different regions have developed or companies have developed or local governments have developed or even national strategies, so they can be shared with others, so that when people are behind the curve, let's say, they can learn from those who are the front runners and who are moving ahead with it. So it continues to work, it continues to function. It's the first of its kind. It's a joint project between the European Commission and the European Economic and Social Committee. And we do a big conference once a year, but the rest of the year we're meeting every month with the stakeholders within the platform to be able to drive that agenda forward and continue to give the feedback. And what was very important for us was that it wasn't going to be a space for the people who were writing the policy to be able to come and tell everybody all the wonderful work that they were doing and share their initiatives with everyone. It had to be a two-way street. So it had to be a space for the stakeholders to be able to communicate back up what their problems were, where the gaps were, where the difficulties were. And that's hard for politicians to hear very often. You know, they don't want to put themselves in a space where they're being criticized or where they're being told what's not working. So I have to say that the commission have been very good on this. I mean, they needed pushing on it, to be perfectly frank, but they've been very good for having their ears open and reacting to what they're hearing from the stakeholders. And I think it's one of the reasons why we've seen such a lot of movement on circular economy. And although it's just filtering out into general society and into other spaces within certain sectors, people have been working on it for a number of years now, and it's advancing quite quickly in terms of business models and in terms of where investment is going as part of the new policy that's been developed on sustainable financial reporting, where companies have to report on what they're doing in terms of sustainability to combat greenwashing. There's some new legislation to really focus on what is meant by when you say your investments are green or when your company is green. One of the specifics on that is circular economy, to give practical examples of what you're doing towards circularity that can be measured, so that the work can qualify as being green in that way. So we're also continually feeding back into that. So I'll kind of leave opening remarks there. One last thing to say though is what's been very useful is to link this circular economy initiatives to the sustainable development goals, in particular to goal 12, which is on responsible consumption and production. And interestingly, next year in 2023, at the high level political forum in New York, the EU and the European Commission specifically needs to report back to the UN on how they're achieving the sustainable development goals. These are the goals that we all signed up to that need to be achieved by 2030. And in 2023, the European Commission needs to write it's called a voluntary national review, a VNR. They need to write that and present it in New York at the forum to say how they're achieving the SDGs. So they're something like circular economy and the work being done on circularity is measured by each member state and reported back so that they can see if they're achieving the goals or not. So it's just another way of, I think, important to be aware that these high level umbrella policies that can seem kind of general and can seem a bit wordy rather than rather than very practical, we can link them all the way back down to a stakeholder level, to a citizen level, and see how they become practical. And then these structures like the EESC, the Economic and Social Committee, or the stakeholder platform are designed in order to be able to feed that information back up, a bottom-up feeding information, so it gets right up to the policymakers. And of course, as I said at the start, it doesn't always work, but at least the structures are there. And what it requires is people to understand them and people to engage with them in order to make them as effective as possible.
Okay, thank you, Cillian, for a very enlightening paper and talk on the circular economy in the first place, and also on the EESC and the stakeholder platform. I think what you've said provokes a lot of questions and comments, as well as informing us about what is happening around circular economy at EU level and below, and at the more supranational level as well. So I'd like to introduce our respondent, Dr. Barbara Doyle-Prestwich. Barbara works in the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences, BEES at UCC, and she's head of plant science there. Barbara has been heavily involved in initiatives for sustainable agriculture and urban farming. And she's also one of the founders of the UCC Open Arboretum project, which is a fantastic project that explores the use of trees in education, and specifically in environmental education. And I know, as one of the people who's done one of the Arboretum walks and talks, it's been really eye-opening. So I'd like to introduce Barbara and ask if she would respond. Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Cillian. That was really interesting. I look forward to following up with you in another occasion as well. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, and Kira, maybe if you can tell me if it's working okay.
Perfect. You might want to go to the view, just that it's on the main view and not your, we're seeing the presenter view at the moment.
It's always the way that this works in practice and never works when I actually need it to work. This was fine earlier. So one moment, I'm waiting for this top line to disappear so I can actually get at the presenter view. No.
Is it perhaps in display settings if we're seeing the...
Yeah, but it's blocked at the moment by... Oh, that's ridiculous. Wait now, 1 second. So, have I come out of sharing, Kira?
You're not, no, you're still sharing.
Okay, great.
You have it, perfect.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so thank you, Catherine, for inviting me to be a respondent to Cillian on this webinar looking at environmental policy making and the circular economy. And by way of my response, I will be talking about some of the projects that we're engaged in the School of Bees, as Catherine introduced me there. Okay, so just a brief, I won't go through all of this bio, but I just want to point out, just to give what I'm about to say some context. So I'm a plant biotechnologist whose broad research interests include the use of biotechnology for sustainable agriculture, crop improvement, and the use of plants for the production of medicinal compounds. And in terms of where my funding for research comes from, at the moment it's state agencies like Enterprise Ireland, the Irish Research Council, Science Foundation Ireland, and Horizon Europe as well. And I'm also working with it's a spin-out company from Rebel Bio, if any of you are familiar with that, in UCC, and the company is called Plant Edit. Yeah, okay. So for my presentation, my input here, I've divided up into 4 kind of sections. And the first part, following on from Cillian, I'm going to talk about sustainability, climate change, and the circular economy in relation to food. It's what I work on. The second part, and these are just kind of broad, kind of just divisions I've made here, but they all obviously they all overlap rather. So part 2, I'll be looking at engaging civil society. Part 3, the value of the SDGs and how they can be enacted at local level. And of course, the SDGs will be part of everything that I'm talking about. And part 4, I'm going to finish by talking about a public consultation that I've had some experience with. And I just want to highlight what I think are some of the limitations in relation to public consultations. Now, Cillian has given a great definition very succinctly about what the circular economy is. And it's the Environmental Protection Agency in Ireland that is leading out on the circular economy here. And just as Cillian mentioned already, so as opposed to the linear economy, which is take, make, waste, the circular economy tries to eliminate where possible waste from the system and reuse. And Cillian has given us great examples on that front there. So in terms of food, then, under the banner of sustainability, climate change and the circular economy, I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but I have to give some facts before I start talking about maybe some of our own work. But it's estimated that food waste is a massive issue in our world today, and also in Ireland. And I suppose we all know from each of our homes maybe as well, that as much as we try to prevent food waste, some of it is in fact inevitable. But it's estimated that about a third of the world's food is wasted. That's a massive amount of food, equivalent to about 1.3 billion tons per year. And at the same time, a horrific figure of 700 million people go to bed hungry every night. And in addition to that, it's estimated that over 2 billion are actually micronutrient deficient in elements like zinc and iron. And of course, that has really very bad effects for people, who then results in physical and mental impairment. They can't work, so there's a cycle of poverty as a result. So huge issues. And in terms of, we're all familiar with this figure of 9 billion in terms of our population growth. So the onus is on us to produce more food, to produce food in a different way, and certainly to produce food in a sustainable fashion and within what we refer to as planetary boundaries. Food waste depends on where you live, I guess, in part, because at harvest time, for instance, in some poorer parts of the world, insufficient resources may result in a lot of food waste. So for instance, resources in terms of how food is stored, the handling facilities at the site of production, all of that impacts on food waste, resulting in food rotting. And in our part of the world, in industrialized countries, more than 40% of the waste occurs in retail and in the homes. And of course, in terms of food waste, it's not just the food itself that's wasted, but of course it's wasted resources in terms of the land that's been used to grow the food, in terms of water, in terms of energy, in terms of time from the producers, and of course other inputs as well, maybe in terms of fertilizers or other inputs that are used. And the World Food Programme states that if food wastage was a country, it would be the third largest producer of carbon dioxide globally. That's quite incredible. And food waste also, remember, when it goes to landfill, generates methane. And of course, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, and massive implications in terms of climate here. So really something has to be done in terms of how we're dealing with this system. So in the circular economy, part of the focus is on reducing waste, as we've said already. So, and Cillian also mentioned the European Green Deal. So the European Green Deal has three major areas, I suppose, that's part of it. And it's no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, where economic growth is decoupled from resource use, and Cillian alluded to that earlier. And thirdly, no person and no place left behind. And so Europe, as you may be aware, is striving to be the first climate neutral continent. As part of the European Green Deal, we have the farm to fork strategy, and I won't go through much of the detail on this, but suffice to say the farm to fork strategy, what it is aiming to do is to build a food chain that works for everyone, that works for consumers, that works for producers, that works for the climate, and that doesn't negatively impact on the environment. So this is the farm to fork strategy. And by 2030, I think it is, by 2030, the farm to fork strategy is focused on reducing pesticide use by 50%. And that's an amazing figure, really, because then I would question, what can we do in the meantime in terms of producing food sustainably? And it's on that note that I want to follow with plant breeding innovation. I'm sorry, I hope this is not distracting. I'm moving these pictures of ourselves around the screen. I don't know if you can see that. In order for me to see the slide, I have to keep moving you guys from left to right. Maybe you can't see that. I hope you can't. Okay, so in terms of innovation, we're talking here about in the last, I mean, plant breeding has been going on for thousands of years in one way or another, but in the last, say, 30, 40 years, there have been huge advances in plant breeding innovation. And I want to talk a little bit about that and the work work that we're doing in our own lab as well in relation to reducing food waste. So plant breeding innovation can help us prevent at least some of the food waste by developing fruits and veg with a longer shelf life as maybe one example. And I want to use this slide to show you how this industry termed plant biotechnology, and I won't go into the details, this is not a lecture, but I just want to point out that for people who are not involved in this area, that plant biotechnology, the fruits, shall we call them, of plant biotechnology, has contributed to increasing crop productivity, so reducing land use. We can help conserve biodiversity, because by reducing the amount of land and increasing the profitability and the yields of the crops that are grown, we can actually use less land, so conserving biodiversity. In addition, as part of this, we can actually reduce, and it has been shown to reduce agriculture's eco footprint. We see a lower CO2 emission. And during this period here, between 1996 and 2014, pesticide spraying was reduced by 583.5 million kilograms. So resulting in a massive environmental impact from these sprays. And in addition then, in relation to climate, because of fewer herbicide and insecticide applications, we're seeing reduced fuel use, reduced CO2 emissions. That's equivalent to taking 12 million cars off the road in 1 year. So these figures are quite amazing. This data is compiled by the ISAAA.org and looks at global data. And you should take a look at that if you haven't seen maybe some of this information before. I suppose, lest anybody think that this technology is a niche technology, this is just a snapshot from 2019 of the countries that have embraced this technology and where it's working quite well. So you can see Europe. There's not much happening in Europe in relation to this technology, and that is a debate maybe for another day. But, excuse me, countries like Portugal and Spain, and I think the Czech Republic, are involved in this, but we have major players like Canada, the United States, we have Central and South America. Brazil is a big player in this. We have Southeast Asian countries, and we have Australia. And then the crops listed here are amongst some of the crops that are being grown in this space. So from soybean, maize, cotton, canola, potato, I won't go through all of them. Okay, so in terms of our own work then, and how we see as a contributor to this innovation in plant biotechnology, we're working on a technology, as are a lot of people across Europe as well. I'm involved in a cost action of over 300 people in labs across Europe that are using this technology with the circular economy in mind as well, in terms of food waste, and also in terms of the farm to fork strategy of reducing sprays. This technology here is called gene editing, and Dr. Raghu Badmi is a senior postdoc working in my lab, and Raghu is working on a project to generate strawberries that are disease resistant to a particular pathogen. And so we've been quite, would I say, vocal, quite active in the print media, in social media, and engaging civil society and members of the public in the power of this technology. Donal is working on hemp, cannabis sativa, for a number of different reasons, but not least because of its application in terms of the circular economy, and particularly the biological cycle that Cillian referred to earlier. Just another mention of the technology in action. This is nothing to do with us, but I just wanted to draw attention to this. This is the Innovative Genomics Institute in the San Francisco Bay Area in the States, with a budget of $11 million. They're looking to create plants that can pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere and funnel carbon into the soil, which is one of the things obviously that we're interested in on a global scale. Just to point out, because we're interested here in engaging the public and then civil society and all the topics in relation to circular, sustainability, climate. So we, like I say, have, as much as possible, we have been active in, as I say, print and social media on various different platforms to engage with members of the public, to talk with consumers, to engage stakeholders at all levels, and to get feedback on all these topics that we're interested in. The first one here relates to the tree project, which I'll come on to in a moment. My colleague, Dr. Owen Latisse, and myself had input into Cork County on the Rise. It was a supplement on integrated approaches to sustainable food production is what is needed in Ireland. And I'm conscious that the examples I've given are from plant innovation technology. But of course, that's only one part of any solution that is on the table. It's by no means the only solution. And I just want to make that clear. We are interested in integrated strategies as opposed to a one-dimensional approach. In 2018, we ran an international conference in Dublin, whose the remit, it was part of the International Association of Plant Biotechnology. And again, we were heavy on the radio, on TV and the print media, and trying to engage all stakeholders in the process and discuss with academics and companies involved in this area. That was 2018. The Sunday Business Post featured some work from UCC that we were associated with. And also for those joining who are not from, not from Ireland, maybe beyond Ireland on this, our national broadcaster RTE has a platform called RTE Brainstorm that people can write articles that are written in, shall we say, not too much scientific kind of jargon, so that they're, they can be read without having a science degree, shall we say. So we contribute in that area as well. Okay, with more focused engaging civil society, and this is just the second part of my presentation. So what do we do here in terms of engaging civil society? Well, again, if you're from outside UCC listening to this, as part of the academic strategy in UCC, at its core is what's called the connected curriculum. And I suppose you could describe the connected curriculum as a more holistic educational approach, where it's not just, but of course, essential to that is research-based teaching. But in addition, we recognize that all of these other inputs are extremely valid and valuable. So in terms of civic and community engagement, in terms of sustainability, inter and transdisciplinarity is key, of course, as well, as is the global reach and employability. So all of this forms part of a, as I say, a holistic educational approach. So continuing with the theme of civic and community engagement as part of the connected curriculum, one of the things that I'm involved in in the school level is I coordinate the research project, which is a 5-month or 6-month research project that final year undergraduate students get involved with. And they have a kind of a choice of 3 ways of choosing their project when they get to 4th year. So either they can come up with a title themselves based on their research interests and a staff member who they might like the work that they're doing. Or secondly, they could just choose from a list of offered projects by academic staff. Or the third way is an interesting approach that has been happening for the last number of years. And it's to engage or work with the UCC Civic and community engagement on this community academic research links. So in this scenario, community groups will come via the Civic and Community Engagement Office with a list of topics that they have identified in their local area where they would like some extra research carried out. So it's really interesting. And over the years, projects have varied hugely in terms of biodiversity, wetlands, birds, bees, and more recently, one that I would be more familiar with would be from Dr. Owen Latisse, looking at, what was it called? It was called the South Parish Tree Survey. So residents in that area, that part of Cork City, were interested in mapping the trees and then looking at them from a biodiversity perspective. And it's all really nice. And I wasn't involved in that particular aspect of it, but I'm told they had a nice showcase with the community where the results are disseminated to members in the community. And this is really research in action and led by the Civic or have civic engagement at its centre. Another project that I want to tell you a little bit about, and we're having, shall I say, great fun in doing, is this UCC Arboretum project that Catherine mentioned earlier. This is now in its 3rd year. We're currently funded by Science Foundation Ireland, and to date, Science Foundation Ireland would have given us close to €100,000 to develop this project, which is very much about engaging with members of the public at all levels, from very young to, there is no age range in this. It's everybody who's interested in this subject matter. And I suppose at the beginning, so if you pardon the pun, this had its roots in the Living Lab Fund, which was rolled out by the UCC Green Campus. And so we got kind of seed money from that project. And then we went from strength to strength. And 3 years later, we've got 100,000 from SFI and we're back out again. We've just submitted another project to go nationwide and to work with a professor in English looking at the cultural aspects of this. So amongst the areas that we have kind of rolled out this project project 2 would be UCC Civic Engagement, Culture Night, Enactus, National Tree Week, UN International Day of Forests, Biodiversity Week, Global Fascination of Plants Day, which I'll say more about in a moment, Greening Our City series with Cork Chamber, Test Site Project, Public Walking Tour of Cork City Centre, amongst other things. I couldn't fit them all here, but this is just a snapshot of some of the activities where we're engaging members of the public in the activities we do. The other thing, because this started during COVID, so we couldn't actually do some of the outreach, any of the outreach activities. So instead we went online and we recorded as a starting point, we did this short film which we put on YouTube. It's called the Arboretum Monologues. And we walk around the Arboretum, we pick trees of interest, we talk about the attributes in terms of environment, climate, biodiversity, medicinal. And one of the things from the UCC Civic and Community Engagement Office, they really liked this idea for community groups, because anybody can do this. So anybody can take their camera phone, go out into their own area, and talk about the trees in their area or whatever it is. It could be any aspect of the environment, and post these short clips on a shared platform that can benefit all aspects of the community. So it's really simple, and we have to date gotten great feedback from this, and we've rolled it out to schools as well, so it has been quite nice. So in addition, as part of our project, the tree project as well, we've been active with younger people as well. So we in the initial stages, we targeted schools that were categorized as DESH schools. So for those people not familiar with that term, it's schools basically who might be located in disadvantaged areas of the city. So we started with those kind of schools, and then we've broadened it out further. We've had a great time doing these activities. The children get engaged in science related, maths, in relation to even tree measurements, things like that, and all the other attributes associated with our open arboretum, which incidentally, for those of you not familiar with it, our arboretum in UCC is now internationally accredited, set on 42 acres and has over 2,500 trees. This picture here is from Roaring Water Bay, beautiful Roaring Water Bay in West Cork, where we were last week, and we're rolling out this initiative to schools in rural Ireland as well. We've also contributed to policy, because I know Catherine is keen to understand the policy part as well. So we've rolled this out in terms of, we've contributed rather to various policy initiatives, to the Cork City Tree Policy, Cork City Heritage and Biodiversity Plan 2021 to 26, Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council Trees and Urban Forest Strategy. And more recently, Emma, who's a research assistant on this project, was just presenting at a conference whose name escapes me now in Maynooth earlier in the week, and was talking about our potential input into the national primary school curriculum. So that's something we're quite keen to follow up on. Okay, so then just in addition then, or within the remit of talking about engaging the public and civil society, I want to talk next a little bit about the journey of food. And the journey of food is something I think that's close to our hearts, and maybe kind of came to the fore even more during COVID, because we saw all these initiatives spring up, certainly around the Cork City region. So the Irish Food Board, on board BIA, has some information in relation to local and low food miles. So what is it? So essentially it's focusing on sourcing food or food ingredients from as close to the point of purchase or consumption as possible. And you can see from, say, surveys that On Board BIA have carried out that consumers do see this as an important influence on their shopping, with 84% of them saying they have made some effort to buy more local in the last 12 months, which is quite significant. And we see from surveys that particularly residents in Western European countries, this is something that is quite important and close to their own hearts. Less so in Asian markets, but for an obvious reason, where a lot of the food may be imported there. And another initiative, speaking of the journey of food, that we have been involved in. So earlier this year, we established the first university urban farm in Europe. We established that on our site here in Distillery Fields in the School of Bees. And this is Jenny. Jenny is the Irish representative of the American company Tower Farms. It's a vertical growing system. It's aeroponic, so it's soilless. The system uses 97% less water, and there is no nutrient seepage. So all of the nutrients are used or recycled. So, in terms, again, of no waste in terms of the circular economy. This is fitting that there. This is Maria, and we'll meet Maria later. Dr. Maria Karan is the Sustainability Officer in UCC. And I put Maria in this picture here because I called on her on the day to say a few words, because I wanted to highlight the importance across the university, and I say this quite a bit at various fora, that the importance of small amounts of seed funding can make a massive difference to ongoing projects, to kickstart various initiatives. And this for us has been hugely successful, and we hope to take it on further through Horizon Europe. So as part again of engaging with the public, we had our Global Fascination of Plants Day on May the 18th this year, and we launched our urban farm on that day. So we opened our doors between 12 and 5. We opened the glass houses, the urban farm, we opened our labs, and we had great input from all members of the plant science staff that we have in the School of Bees. And we had great reaction. We had loads of people come in during those hours, from young to old, all very interested in food production and what we're doing as part of university initiatives. The urban farm has also, we've been able to recruit Erasmus students. So Maria was an Erasmus student with us for a year in UCC. It took some of my modules, was inspired as part of the whole urban farm initiative, and gave us 3 months of her time as a volunteer. We can roll the urban farm out to younger people in terms of, this is a transition year student, happens to be my son, but he did his work experience as part of the urban farm project, and we brought in other schools as well. This is what the urban farm looks like in all its glory. It looks really splendid. In the sunshine in the summer was fantastic, thanks to the technical staff as part of our school, who have taken great care of many aspects of the farm as well. We've rolled it out across the university now as part of a wellbeing initiative. But during the summer, daily almost, we were sending emails around the School of Bees for people to come and harvest the food. So come and get the food on your doorstep, come and supplement your lunch boxes, take cabbages for your dinner, whatever it is you're interested in. This was all a really nice initiative. Going further then out to Cork City, Brian, who's down here, this is Brian. Brian owns and runs the Cork Rooftop Farm initiative. And Brian, you can see here again, 2 of those vertical towers in the window as showpieces in his restaurant there, in his cafe there. Brian has converted the rooftop of this building, Cork Rooftop Farm, into an urban farm. And it's really, really nice. I don't think it's open to the public as yet, but he has a massive polytunnel on the roof where he has about 20 of these towers, and he's growing food for local restaurants and supplying a stall on the quay. What is it called? The Coal Quay in Cork City, the food market there on a Saturday morning. Another initiative that we were associated with, as in, well, just, very distantly associated with, we went to visit this group up the country called Emerald Greens. These are former mushroom growers that, with the decline for them in that industry, they converted their large, mushroom facilities into these, farms where they're using LED lights to grow microgreens. And on the morning we arrived, they were just comparing and contrasting basil that had been imported from Kenya, as opposed to basil that had been grown in Ballyporeen. So we just food for thought, if you pardon the pun there again. This is the Cork Food Policy website, and I just wanted to draw attention to this. And even though I'm not personally associated with the Cork Food Policy Council, I just wanted to draw attention to its existence if you're not aware of it. And this is a partnership between representatives of the community, food, education, environmental and health sectors, and local authorities, and they are doing fantastic work in this space. And other food policy councils are also in existence around the country, because we had some association as part of a research grant with councils just spread throughout the country. I won't take too much longer, Catherine. I don't want to be taking up too much time. We want time for discussion, but just to say that in terms of the value of the SDGs and how they can be enacted at local level, you've seen, if you're familiar with the SDGs in any shape or form, you'll have seen the SDGs scattered throughout what I've already said so far. So the 3 dimensions of the SDGs are economic, social, and environmental. And one of the things I'd like to introduce you to is the Centre for Global Development in UCC, which is, the current director is Dr. Rosarie Griffin. This centre was founded in 2011 and is truly a cross-university initiative where we have members as part of the steering committee and affiliate members from across all of the colleges in the university. And the aim of the CGD is to promote a focus on addressing major developmental challenges development challenges informed by values of social justice, inclusivity and sustainability. And one of the initiatives we had as part of the CGD was to roll out this micro-credential, a digital badge in citizenship for global development, so the SDGs in action. And so we had more participants than you see here. This is a particular night I did the snapshot. So we had Dirk is a professor in computer science, and Dirk wanted to use this information as part of his Internet of Things modules. Rehumanizing economics with Brian, non-communicable diseases with nursing and midwifery, microbiology with Carmel, and then we had also students involved, and this particular student was from the School of Bees, focused on sustainable agriculture. You might be aware that 2 weeks ago, I think it was, the Irish government has launched its second national implementation plan for the Sustainable Development Goals for the period 2022 to 2024, and underpinned with the 5 Ps for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. So we have in that there are 5 strategic objectives. I won't go through them all, but amongst them is to embed the framework into the work of government departments and also local authorities and so on. And UCC had a part to play in this with Maria Karan and others in that team looking at mapping the strategic development goals. I'm going to finish on this, Catherine. I just want to finally say the final part of what I want to say is in relation to public consultation and what I perceive to be some limitations. I don't have an answer for it and we can discuss it, but one of the things that we were involved in again was it's the technology within Europe that's not currently being utilized, but we're doing a lot of research on it, and there are a lot of groups around in labs around Europe that are working in the area of genome editing. It's rolled out in many countries and approved in many countries around the world, but not so as yet in Europe. But there was a public consultation that was opened from last April until July. And in advance of that public consultation, we were doing some engagement with civic society, with the public, with anybody really who were interested in this topic. And we were trying to get interest in the topic. And again, we went to the print media. We were invited to attend the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine, the Oireachtas Committee. We appeared as, inverted commas, expert witnesses. Well, maybe not inverted commas, as expert witnesses, but 4 of us from UCC were invited to attend. And so we presented, and that recording is available on the House of the Oireachtas website if anybody's interested in following that up. So we did quite a bit of engagement, and in addition, thanks to funding from the College of CEFs and the School of Bees, we were able to run this free one-day international symposium where we were trying to tease out the topics and raise awareness in relation to the technology and its value to Irish agriculture under the banners of everything we've been talking about today in terms of climate, biodiversity, sustainability, and the circular economy. And so we had speakers from Belgium, the United Kingdom, from Germany, from South America, from North America, from Teagasc, the Irish research arm of the state, from our own lab. Raghu presented the work we're doing, and also we invited in a farmer he's a tillage farmer and chair of the Irish Grain Growers Group, because we wanted to get the perspective of the farmers at the coalface. So we did that in advance of the closing of this public consultation. But it was very disappointing, I think, that for me, when I asked the question in the audience of how many people had heard about this public consultation, and so to an educated audience that I would have thought, be quite well aware of this, very few were aware of the public consultation. So I think that's a limitation in our system, that we're going out asking the public's opinion on really important matters, but yet the public are not even aware in some cases of these consultations. So how do we change that? How do we improve that? I don't have an answer. I'll finish on this last point definitely. So Sirku is the deputy head of the biotechnology unit in the European Commission. And when I asked her on the day, she told us that up to that point in June, so a month out from the closing of the consultation, there were about 1,000 respondents, which if you think of the population of the European Union, that's very small, isn't it, in terms of, a consultative process. So I'll leave it there, Catherine. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for such a wealth of information on a range of sustainable activities and circular economy activities that are happening both locally, nationally and internationally, and also the connections there with between the university and civil society, for instance. You made very clear the importance of those connections and the impact that this can have. I would I suppose that there's much more that can be said about what you've said, and also Cillian. But I'd like us to move into a few questions to both yourself and Cillian on some of the issues and areas that you've discussed. And I might get the ball rolling by drawing on a question that's come in from our audience, because it connects very much with the question that I would have also. And this question is for Cillian. Thanks very much, Cillian, for your talk. And David is just asking if about your experiences of EU-wide stakeholder engagement initiatives. I think this connects very much with what Barbara was saying about public consultation, and I suppose some of the limitations of public consultations vis-a-vis other participatory forms. Could you tell us about some of the challenges of engaging at EU level and at that scale, and how these may be or are being overcome?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, David, for the question. It is a real problem to have engagement and consultation, and I think some of it is a cultural problem, an historical problem, where we elect people in democracies or in the governing systems that we live in. We elect people, and then we entrust them to do the work. And maybe in recent years, as we've seen a breakdown in trust for institutions and for governments, and we see the social consequences of that, or we see the rise of extremist groups all across Europe, and we see the rise of what's broadly termed populism. In response to that, I think they're all symptoms that show this breakdown in trust, and probably the financial crash also exposed the fact that there was that correctly there was a lack of trust in the people who had been entrusted with running our economic system and our governance systems, and they weren't functioning properly. The solution to that is more engagement. I think, you know, it's more engagement from citizens, and saying, okay, now we need to step up, and we need to be active, and we need to be engaged. And in order for people to be able to do that, they need accurate information. They need to be well informed on the topic and on the subject. They need to be able to access the consultation processes. And very often, those who are carrying out the consultation processes design them in such a way as to have minimum input. You know, we've all seen, certainly in the environmental sector over the years, we've seen consultations being advertised as is the obligation to have them advertised in national media, but they're on a particular day where statistically they know people are less likely to look at the paper, and it's on the bottom left hand corner of a left hand page where you're less likely to look at it. And even the language around it, or the style of it, is so boring that, you know, even if you're into it, you're like, oh my god, how I'm not going to spend time wading through this. And I think it's been deliberately designed like that. And so the same at the EU level. There is an attempt to be more consultative. We have this structure, the institution that I'm part of, the EESC, which is a consultative body and does work in a sense in getting in allowing stakeholders and civil society to have an input in a very structured way. I've just set up a new structure for youth organizations on climate and sustainability to have roundtables directly with European commissioners. And that's been working very well, because it's small groups of youth activists who are very well informed on the topic, having a direct contact. You know, we put 12 or 15 of them in a room with a European commissioner and the commissioner's staff, and there's a direct exchange and feedback on the inputs that are being received. And I think that feedback is the other element of why the consultations don't really work. Because if you go to the bother of finding that advertisement, if you go to the bother of wading through the boring language, if you put together your submission and you put it in, when the final policy comes out, you know, you'd be doing very well to find your voice in there, and how it has been reflected. And we know for a fact, I mean, it's no secret, but it's probably not um, it's probably not polite to say it, but it's no secret that most of these policies are already written before the consultations, and the consultation is a box ticking exercise rather than an actual engagement with with people and wanting to, you know, hear the voices truly. At an EU level, there's, in the last year, there's been a thing called the Conference on the Future of Europe. Within the bubble of the institutions, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, announced this, and within the bubble of the European institutions, it was thought, this is amazing. We are going out to the citizens of Europe, 420 million people, and we're going to ask them, what kind of Europe do you want? What kind of EU do you want? We want to hear from everybody, and we want to design the EU. At the time, it was before Russia went into Ukraine. So the idea was that the story of peace, of living in peace and harmony with our European neighbors, is no longer enough to hold the EU together, that was fine for a previous generation, but for a generation growing up in a time of peace and military stability, at least, that we needed something else to tie us together within the EU. And this conference was meant to be a really broad consultation on that, and the engagement was really poor. I mean, I was involved in organizing over 100 events across different member states on this as consultation processes, and we fed them all in, but it was a huge amount of work and it was really difficult. And I went to Strasbourg, where there was a plenary for this, and we gave the input, but the level of engagement was, you know, at a level of less than 50,000 people out of 420 million. That's not really a consultation. And I have to say, all of my friends, I was going to say most, but all of my friends here in West Cork were unaware that it was even happening, you know, that it was even going on. So it didn't reach down into a community level. So there are real structural problems in consultation. And I think the only way to overcome it is to be very engaged, to be more engaged. And those of us with the privilege of having an education, or even not a formal education, but access to resources and knowledge that allows us to be informed in a particular topic, or through our life experiences we have become experts in a particular area, then we need to be cognizant of the fact that the rules of the game that we're playing within, or the society that we're living in, are being made by human beings who are sitting at laptops and writing these policies, and they're being reviewed. And you can have, there is access points to get in there. And I think it's a question of mobilization of active citizenship. It's I don't underestimate the fact that there are barriers to doing it at the moment, but there are routes there and ways to do it. And at the only immediate thing I think we can do is all go out and look online for what policy submissions, consultations are open at the moment, and flood them with as much input as possible. Because I mean, you know, that does work if you do start the engagement, but there's no easy answer to it. Unfortunately, it requires massive systemic change in thinking, and change in how we elect people and why we elect people. But it's important for now, I think, just to get engaged. So I'm sure David can find specific areas that he's interested in, and find where those consultations are happening, and encourage friends and colleagues and family to do the same.
Okay, thanks very much, Cillian. I think this is really raising I suppose the issue that's related to this subject as well, of participatory democracy and some of the strengths and limitations of participatory democracy. But of course, it's important to mention that there are innovations in participatory democracy occurring, and public consultation is just one means in which to, I suppose, again, public interest and public participation. So I'd like to ask Ciara O'Halloran, would you like to come in for a question? Thanks, Ciara.
Sure, I can. And actually, I guess it's related to that as well, I suppose, in terms of that mobilization of kind of active citizenship or that participatory democracy. And I think, you know, I'm just wondering in terms of, there's been some wonderful initiatives highlighted by Barbara there, and in lots happening in Cork, and Cillian, you have lots of experience about, you know, in wider contexts. And I'm wondering, I also noticed, I think she's maybe not in the room anymore, but Santi McGroarty, who would have been involved as well in kind of the PPN here in Cork. So I'm just wondering what the priorities may be in terms of achieving that sort of that wider impact and transition now. And if you have, you know, what do you feel like the priorities may be, let's say, even for the next kind of like 2 to 3 years, for those of us who are sort of active around this, in sort of mobilizing engagement with these discussions? And would you have a sense, what would you have a sense of what the kind of couple of priorities really should be over the next couple of years?
I think, Ciara, in the space of education, it's so important to have well-informed people. You know, I think the biggest lesson we can take, or example we can take from recently, is the youth climate activists. You know, I've been working in the area of climate and sustainability and environment for, I don't know, over 20 years. And we were always on the outside. You know, we were always kind of either the weirdos, or they presumed to be wearing sandals and woolly jumpers, and, you know, previously just the hippies who were coming in to say, hey, we should all love the environment a little bit. And that's gone away to some extent. And I think we need to take a lesson of, well, how has that changed? It's still there in some areas. I'm doing work on rights of nature and trying to develop a charter of fundamental rights for nature. And in that world, that's currently at the stage of, you know, it's not viewed very favorably, let's say, by a lot of people, are not taken seriously by enough people. But in the world of climate and sustainability, suddenly it's integrated into everything. So, and that happened through increased engagement and participation. 2 weeks ago, I was down um, in Luxembourg with the European Defence Agency, which was a weird place for me to end up, with all the ministries of defence from around the EU, because the European Defence Agency and the military want to go circular, and they want to increase their sustainability credentials. And at first I thought that's crazy, because what are they talking about? I jokingly said to a friend, oh, they probably want like eco bullets for shooting people. And when I got there, somebody did a presentation on eco bullets that they were developing that didn't have lead in them, so that they would, after they shot somebody, it wouldn't damage the soil afterwards. But apart from that, like, small element of it, the fact that they've huge spending power, you know, they spend billions on procurement for their uniforms, for the buildings, equipment that they have, machinery, and all of that. So actually, once I got there, then it made sense. This is a huge spending power for them to be ensuring that they're procuring sustainably, and bearing these things in mind means it's really infiltrated into a lot of different sectors. And I think that's happened. The reason I mention it is because I go back to the youth movement starting to march on this, starting to be engaged with this, and they pushed all of these peripheral items to the top of the agenda. Really, they, you know, at a difficult time, they pushed it right up the agenda, so that suddenly environment, sustainability opens every door now in a policy sense. And 90% of the doors that open have somebody behind the door who doesn't know what sustainability means, who doesn't really understand the science, the climate science, but they're interested to do something, or to be seen to do something. And we're at a critical point where um, at the moment, in a rush to do the right thing, there's a lot of people doing the wrong thing, you know, or they're ticking boxes as being green or sustainable at a time when it's not. So the engagement needs to continue in order to watch that. And there's a lot happening in that space to remedy that problem, let's say. But in terms of immediate action, I think we can take a lesson from the climate marchers and the Fridays for Future um, um, students who went out marching, and it's get engaged, you know, they got informed about a problem, they learned the facts, they educated each other and themselves. In any meetings I've had with Fridays for Future, or even with Greta Thunberg, she was insisting that there was also a scientist present, so somebody who was properly qualified, so that we weren't just having a political conversation, but it was fact based. And this kind of approach, a fact based approach, and mobilization of numbers is the immediate thing that we can do, because as a group, you know, civil society organizations don't have the power, you know, even within the EU institution I'm in, we don't have the power to change any of the decisions. We can advise and we can suggest and we can make noise and we can criticize, but the power lies elsewhere. But what we do have is we have the numbers of people, and if we can stimulate a large number of people to be active and engaged, that's when it gets on the agenda, and that's when the people who have the power sit up and take notice and actually listen. So I think making yourself informed, sharing that information and knowledge with others is so important at the moment, especially currently when we're facing so much disinformation and misinformation on so many different topics. But having those, updating them regularly, being able to quote your sources for what you're saying, and having the numbers and getting engaged with finding the structures that are there, as crap as they are, or as poor as they are at the moment, you know, finding where they are, because they are there in some way, and then engaging with them and blowing them open so that they become bigger kind of conduits to access the people who are making the decision. I think that's the immediate steps we could take.
Thanks very much. Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks, Cillian. And that answer is very comprehensive, and I think also answers for us how widely the circular economy needs to be. When you talk about the European Defence Agency and the importance of circular economy there, maybe leaving aside bullets, but in other respects, in terms of their work. Okay, so I think we've a few points from our message board, and just to put out one of those points there, and we also have another question. Rosary Griffin. Rosary is head of the Global Development in UCC and Centre for Global Development. Sorry, Rosary. Cillian and Barbara. Rosary is asking whether regeneration, the concept of regeneration or to regenerate, is the next step beyond sustainability. I don't know if either of you has a view on this question, but perhaps if you do, you might come back on this. Thanks.
I'm conscious of talking too much as well, so Barbara, I'm don't want to hog the microphone or hog the floor, but I do think that is the next step, because there's also a thing around the language, isn't there? Because we've talked about sustainability for so long, and now you see the word kind of abused in so many different sectors. You see sustainable finance and sustainable initiatives, and they're talking about sustainable as defined in the English dictionary, rather than sustainable in terms of sustainable development. And certainly at a policy level, I'm always trying to change references to sustainability to a reference to the principles of sustainable development. So rather than saying, you know, we want a sustainable food policy, saying that we want a food policy that's in line with the principles of sustainable development. And I think that echoes, you know, Barbara mentioned earlier about the fact that integrated strategies are so important. I mean, sustainable development in itself implies integration and does bring in those different elements. It's not about the environment. You know, if somebody is talking about sustainability and they think they're talking about the environment, if it's sustainable development, you're talking about economic and social also, as Barbara showed in one of those slides as well. So maybe regeneration has a role to play in terms of freshening up the language in one way, so that people start to think again, actively think about what they're talking about, rather than just using a catchphrase like sustainability. But within circular economy thinking, to go from a first step of doing a bit more recycling to a next step now of integrating eco design and remanufacturing, then certainly I think the next stage after that would be something like regeneration. And there's a lot of work in regenerative agriculture in particular. And even though we have those initiatives like Farm to Fork, as Barbara presented as part of the Green Deal, we then have on the other side of the scales the Common Agricultural Policy, which has ploughed ahead and been passed through all of the procedures, and the funding coming through that isn't consistent with the objectives that are set in the Farm to Fork strategy. So that kind of need to be coherent is very important, and to have that proper integration. And I think in the bioeconomy, in the circular economy, in the biospace, certainly regenerative would be a really good next place to go to. And also within the materials economy, because regeneration is a step up on recycling. And I think regeneration, okay, we can go into what exactly we mean by it, but it does imply reusing things, it does imply remanufacturing things, and so on. And by the way, there's a huge social benefit to all of this. I know we haven't really gotten into that, but remanufacturing and repairing items should mean a boom in opportunities available in different areas and regions, and in terms of jobs and opportunities for people and for communities that otherwise might have been left behind by the current economic model. Just to touch on that as well.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's a really good point about sustainable principles and sustainable development rather than sustainability, and its applicability then to every aspect of our lives and not just specific areas of life or industry or agriculture. I might just pass, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I might just pass to Margaret Scanlon. Margaret is the coordinator of ISS 21 here in UCC, and Margaret would like to ask a question. Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'd like to ask about initiatives like the UCC's Green Campus and the Centre for Global Development, which you mentioned earlier, Barbara. Do university initiatives like Green Campus influence local and national policy making on climate change and environmental issues? And how do you think their influence could be increased?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. So, I mean, you saw from kind of some of the initiatives that I spoke about. So we've had great success with those initiatives that I said that started from very small beginnings. And, it's been a real treat for us to be able to have sufficient manpower, shall I say, and sufficient resources to be able to do the stuff that we've been doing in relation to all those school initiatives. We've been able to roll right out, in addition to the schools, urban and rural, we've been able to liaise with various community groups around the city, and that's been tremendously successful. And we're getting great feedback from people who were maybe either unaware of some of these issues, and now we see the language that we're talking about today, like Cillian was saying, sustainability and circular economy. That's kind of common parlance now to hear those terms, isn't it? And people are using it a bit like PCR during COVID. I don't know if anybody knew really beyond the scientists what PCR was prior to COVID, but suddenly this becomes common parlance and it becomes part of our life, doesn't it? The fabric of our life. So yeah, those initiatives have been brilliant. And as I say, thanks to really kind of good seed funding, we were able to get this kind of initiatives off the ground. I think part of this is to do with time. So we're all doing our own work all the time, aren't we? But to give time over to engaging with civil society, with public groups, with community groups, with schools, I think we're seeing more and more the value of doing that, not just because the funding agencies are dictating that we do that, and we should be doing that. We're getting public money to do our research, so we need in a way, obviously, to give back to communities, but it's become very enjoyable for us because it's been properly resourced. We can, get in additional research assistance, and we can engage fully and thoughtfully with the outside community. And actually, that buzzword at the moment that's going around, but it's very valuable. It's to co-create solutions as opposed to go to communities and present them with a fait accompli. We actually identify, or they identify, a problem, and then between us we can co-create the solution. This is really important in terms of sharing information and working together towards the solution. And could I ask, Margaret, I see Maria's on my screen there. I mean, Maria has been front and center with Dr. Maria Karan with the Green Campus. Maria, could I pass over to you, because you guys are doing fantastic work in that sphere as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Barbara. And I won't take too much time, but I suppose just to say that, yes, Green Campus and UCC are inputting locally, nationally and internationally, obviously through our researchers, but also Green Campus specifically would have been invited to input into the consultations around the National Strategy on Education for Sustainable Development. We'll then be engaged in the national stakeholder group around that. Obviously, the SDG implementation plan that you mentioned, Barbara, as well. So our teaching toolkit was highlighted there as a case study of best practice. That's an open source toolkit for integrating the SDGs into your teaching. UCC, we're the only university in Ireland that has observer status at the COP26, COP27 meeting. So we send a delegation of UCC staff and students to those meetings. Really importantly, we send undergraduate and postgraduate students. We sent a group last year to Glasgow. And again, to echo what Cillian said, it's those students that then highlight a lot of the issues around these events. They're the ones that are highlighting the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion at those meetings. Locally, we're actually involved in the City Council. The City Council has an initiative called the Strategic Policy Committees, which the PPN will be involved in as well, which were set up basically to include different sectoral interests in policy making in the city. So we actually sit on the Environment Committee there. So that's how we're kind of inputting into local policy making. Something that's coming up in the future actually is that UCC and Queen's University Belfast have just been chosen as co-hosts for an all-island Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Ciara knows about this. We've been working with her on it. So the SDSN was set up to under the auspices of the UN to basically provide some kind of academic oversight to implementation of the SDGs. And the whole idea of the SDSN is that it's universities, knowledge generating institutions working with local policy, national policy, and private business, basically getting everyone together to implement the SDGs on the ground. So that's something that's just happened in the last few months and will be taking up a lot of my time over the next year. And I'll certainly be telling you all a lot more about that in the future.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Thanks very much for that. And that's really interesting to hear about that new initiative between the two universities. So I think given that it's almost 1 o'clock, Barbara, did you want to come in
sorry,
there?
I won't delay you, Catherine.
Sorry.
It's just I was responding to a message in the chat there from Gertrude, I think, Gertrude Cotter, and I seem to have deleted as opposed to answered. I don't know what happened there. But can I just say, just to Gertrude then, in answer to her question about some of the initiatives I spoke about, yes, they're available in terms of we want to cooperate with whoever would like to cooperate with us. So absolutely get in touch. It's not just the B students, it's not just particular science students, it's everybody who consumes food and is interested in the environment and all the things we've been talking about. So absolutely get in touch. Yeah.
Yes, I think we also had a question there from Declan Egan to Cillian about the stakeholder forum, but perhaps if Declan wants to send on his email address, we can ask Cillian to answer that question, because we don't actually have time right now. Thanks, Declan, for the question. Thanks to everybody on the Q&A, everybody who attended. today's event. And thank you particularly to our speakers, Cillian Lohan, Dr. Barbara Doyle-Prestwich, and also Maria and Kira Margaret. Thanks to everybody for attending. I think this has been a really enlightening and engaging and I think also informative webinar. I've certainly learned a lot about the initiatives that are happening and also ways to engage as someone interested in the environment and interested in contributing to environmental change and sustainable development. So thanks to everybody for participating, taking part, listening and questioning. And we look forward to seeing you again at some of our other events in the future. Thank you all.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Catherine.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a million.
Bye-bye.